So, frankly speaking, I think about a couple of years ago, maybe in 2011-12, I had originally taken a position that we need a UCC. But perhaps I was being a bit more naive then. Over the years, thanks to more reading and gathering of opinions from a lot of subject matter experts, I have come to the position, at least my current position is, it's best to always have a discussion in the backdrop of a suggestion. Okay. So I've given the example. So I know that Mr. Kapil Sibal also said the same thing a few days ago, but this has been my position at least for the last 3 years. In most of my speeches, whenever people have asked me my position on UCC, I said, as a lawyer, it makes very little sense for me to agree to something or disagree with something until I see a document. And if we want to talk about the principle of it, I still want to understand what is the meaning of the principle, iska application kya hoga. And on such a sensitive topic, I'm not as concerned about its impact on Muslims, obviously. I'm more concerned about what it means for Hindus. And given that it is my conscious position, and I would say even an informed position, that the Indian state has rarely been lenient with Hindu customs and the manner in which it goes about riding roughshod on Hindu interests, regardless of who is in power. My first instinct is self-preservation, my community's preservation, that's the Hindu community's preservation. The diversity in Hindu society is way more than anybody can imagine. We have already gone through one round of truncation thanks to the Hindu code. Now, what does the second round mean? And I can't just agree to it just because it is a supposedly pro-Hindu dispensation that is coming with it. Now, if the idea is to address the stark reality of Muslim exceptionalism that has animated Indian political discourse for at least, I would say, 150 years, then that's a very different argument altogether. Then I think it is important to make the case out. So it's like this. When people started talking about Sabarimala, nobody said, let's look at all other institutions until the court realized that there are similar issues pending in the court itself. So when we speak of, polygamy, I think it's important to focus specifically on which community suffers from this problem. Who are we trying to address? If the government of this country, after all these years of independence, still does not have the gumption to call out the problems with one particular community, then why should we accept this? I'll give you an example. When you speak of jati or untouchability, the fact is jati is a subcontinent phenomenon. It's not limited only to Hinduism, thanks to the history and culture of this place. In fact, there are studies to say it equally applied to the Persian society. Okay, but invariably, whenever we speak of jati-based ills, we come to Hinduism. Untouchability becomes the favorite, whipping boy for Hinduism. But when it comes to polygamy today, it is clear that there is only one community that's actually indulging in it, by and large. Why can't we directly call out that particular practice and say this is not acceptable anymore? Why does everyone have to jump on the bandwagon for it to seem uniform? The rest of us are uniform. There is only one particular community which has consciously chosen to stay out of this. Now, the change to inheritance, 100% to the son and daughter, or at least equal share, 50% each. That's something that we have all accepted. The Supreme Court has interpreted it as well. Now, it's only one community that says the son will get X and the daughter will get 50% of it. Or perhaps not even that, I don't know that exactly. So my point is, with these kind of issues affecting one particular community, as opposed to addressing the societal needs of that particular community, why is everybody else expected to join the bandwagon? So I think all of these confusions arise primarily because of the lack of a document. Now perhaps the Law Commission has been asked to seek comments. My suggestion is usually comments are sought in the backdrop of some broad framework or proposal. It can't be an open-ended comment. If someone tells me, comment on the UCC, I say, what do you want me to comment on? Children, property, polygamy, what is it that I'm expected to comment on? So I genuinely want a framework. Until then, I think it is bound to generate confusion. And if someone is interested actually in bringing about UCC, let's call it a secular civil code as opposed to a uniform civil code, if they are really interested in doing so, then they would want to come out with a document so that nobody actually pushes the argument of minority persecution. The absence of a document makes it possible for every mischievous stakeholder or every mischievous party to claim that this is one of the biggest exercises of minority persecution that the so-called Indian state has embarked upon. I don't think that helps. Maybe because neither the Parsi community or, for that matter, even the Jews who live in this country see themselves as descendants of conquerors or invaders. That is one historical mindset. See, there are two aspects to this. To approach personal laws as pure civil issues is not fair, it's not correct. Personal laws come from custom. Custom invariably has some religious angle to it, some scriptural aspect to it. That equally applies to Hindus, it equally applies, that logic applies to Muslims, it applies to a lot of communities. So I am not willing to buy the argument that personal laws have nothing to do with faith. Of course they do. 100% they do. The treatment of the institution of marriage in each religion differs precisely because it's not just a civil issue. It is a civil issue when you contrast it with a criminal issue, but it's not a secular issue. Right? That distinction people rarely get. They say, so what? Why can't we have this? No, there are issues there. Now, second, I think over the years, even those aspects or those fragments of the Muslim community, who I would call as the true minority, who are willing to look ahead and who are willing to let go of the conquistorial baggage that they have inherited, those people are first of all stifled by the hooligans or those who have a problem with anybody speaking of reform in the Muslim community. And two, these rabid voices are pampered more and more. Now, previously it was only the Congress which was accused of pampering such voices. But I have to ask myself this question. If you increase the extent of Muslim exceptionalism in an overall fashion, from minority allocation budgets to whatnot, are you not also pampering a sense of exceptionalism when it comes to interference with these aspects? You can't expect a different outcome. When you say you're special, you're so special, and I have to showcase the amount of money that I'm spending on you to burnish my secular credentials, then you're actually making it difficult for the state to step into the picture, even if it is for a genuine reform, because now the person is going to say, I'm special. Yeah. And that treatment, I don't think has changed. Neither the Congress nor the BJP have changed their approach. The Minority Welfare Ministry was set up only, I think, in 2005-2006. I think it's the National Commission for Minorities, and it came about only around the same time. Until then, we did not have this concept. Why? Because we have always said that the concept of minority must be state-specific, not national. Because depending on the state, the definition of minorities will differ. That's how you define who deserves reservations. From backward communities to minority communities, the unit which is the subject of the focus is not the country, but the state. Right? Now, after the BJP has come into power, so obviously this was introduced post-2004, so this was not a BJP invention. But since 2014, what steps has the government taken to dismantle this structure that exists for increasing the sense of exceptionalism? It hasn't done anything about it, right? Instead, the National Commission for Minority Education Institutions, that was again set up under the previous dispensation, gets a better treatment and has more say when it comes to giving minority tax to educational institutions than even the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, than the MHRD. So the Ministry of HRD, which is actually supposed to have the overall control over certain aspects of education, defers to the opinion of NCMIE, right? I don't think we should discount all of this. There's no point in talking about the UCC alone unless you start addressing each of these aspects. You know why? Because when you go to UCC, you're directly coming to the question of religion. And that is stirring the hornet's nest. Before that, you first take away this sense of exceptionalism by dismantling the National Commission for Minorities, by dismantling the Ministry of Welfare, or even if you retain the National Commission for Minorities, make sure that it's not always only a Muslim who's appointed, or it's only the Muslim interest that is showcased as the minority interest. A community which is 27% in some cases, 30% in some cases in some states, legitimately can't claim itself to be a minority. I don't think that's how it is supposed to work. So, there are a few steps that I think that the government must initiate to address these larger perceptual issues and psychological issues before it directly enters the hot plate of UCC. I don't doubt that even one bit. You have to realize that there are multiple factors involved here. One is to preserve what they believe or what is perhaps the true position of the Shariat. Okay, that's one. Second, it's a non-Muslim state which seeks to intervene. And that will not be acceptable to the All India Muslim Personal Law Board. If, let's say, a Muslim state were to interfere with it, which they have in several other countries, they would have accepted it. But because this is a non-Muslim state, and therefore this is not Darul Islam, it's not the House of Islam, interference of a non-Muslim state, even if it calls itself secular, is problematic. And because they see this as a Hindu majority state, they certainly will not tolerate any kind of interference with the Shariat. So there are two layers of it. One is to protect their religious beliefs, and the second is to protect their religious beliefs against interference by a kafir state. And that, I think, is the most problematic, sensitive, delicate aspect of the discussion that most people shy away from. Shri Arif Muhammad Khan, in the mold of Shri Abdul Kalam, is an exception. We wouldn't need to cite one Shri Arif Muhammad Khan as an example if he were the norm. You're able to cite him because you see him as an exception. He's comfortable going to temples. He's comfortable with embracing cultural aspects of Bharatiyata, which necessarily come from Hinduism, right? In that sense, while I completely don't agree with some of these definitions, he may be by faith a Muslim, but by culture he seems to be a Hindu, which could make him less of a Muslim in the eyes of the rest of the Muslims, right? So, in my opinion, I hope we get more such voices. And I hope we actually have a very clear discussion on the root mentality which prevents the Indian state from stepping into the picture. One is the state giving an exceptional treatment, and the other is the other side believing that you're not a Muslim state, you can't enter the territory at all. And when you do so, you attack our Sharia, and that calls for a reaction. That seems to be the approach. Frankly, I would want to question the first two itself. One, the Ram Janam Bhoomi movement precedes the existence of the BJP or even the Jansangh by centuries. So no one particular organization can take credit for it. That's an achievement of the Hindu community, not of any particular organization, right? Before the RSS or the VHP or the BJP came about, this movement has been going on at least since the 16th century. Yes. When you had the Nihang Sikhs and Ram Bhakts making sure that Ram Navami would never be peaceful for anyone who would occupy Sri Ram's holiest site, right? So this is a movement that's been going on for a very long time. And I wouldn't want any particular organization or any single organization to take credit for it. Second, the decision came from the Supreme Court. It was not a product of any legislation, right? And if I remember it right, every political party, including the BJP, said we will await the outcome of the Supreme Court, we believe in it. So I would assume that the credit must go to the petitioners who've been fighting this battle for a very long time. I don't deny that the BJP's sympathies are, or at least were, with the Ram Janam Bhoomi side. But that doesn't mean that anybody and everybody gets to take credit for it. Second, on the question of Article 370, its amendment, it has changed certain perceptual barriers. It has certainly made it possible for us as Indians, as the rest of Bharatiyas, to have greater access. It has dismantled certain vested interests and lobbies within the valley. I don't deny that. But there are two important aspects. Has it translated to better circumstances for return of Kashmiri Pandits? No, it hasn't. With the spate of killings that we have witnessed over the last 2 years, I cannot agree that the situation has changed and that Kashmir has truly become a paradise. No, it hasn't. Two, while we keep focusing on Kashmir, Jammu is seeing a massive demographic change. So it can't be a situation where we keep focusing on Kashmir and lose sight of every other territory or every other region. What about Ladakh? Right? In light of this, these are, I would say, checkered achievements, if I may say so. But if that was the case with something which is relatively simpler, right? Obviously, UCC is not going to be a walk in the park. Okay? And I would expect that the government draws its lessons from the reactions to the CAA and the farm laws to prepare better, to do its messaging better. See, constitutionally, the government is right under what it did with Article 370. It's equally right when it comes to CAA. But the talk of NRC has died down altogether, which shows that the government is extremely sensitive to any kind of reactions and opposition. And that shows that while the left may not be in power across the country or maybe in just a few places, it has retained its ability to call veto on the ground and force the government to roll back its decisions. So UCC is not just about an internal policy of Bharat. The entire Ummah will stand up, because that is something that we saw even in the Nupur Sharma episode. So I would expect the government to press into service every ounce of its strategic thinking and make sure that its messaging both within and outside the country is up to the mark. I'm sure they're capable of it. I don't know if a judicial approach is the way to go about it. Because you see, the Supreme Court itself has framed certain questions in the context of the Sabarimala case on the power of the judiciary and the ability of the judiciary to enter the realm of faith. Those questions have been framed in the context of rights under Articles 25 and 26. Personal laws are equally protected, customs are equally protected, right? Now, such being the case, I wouldn't want to open the door of judicial intervention in the realm of faith, because that door, its access will not be limited only to the question of UCC. It will go much beyond. And we will see a repeat of what happened in Sabarimala, which I must submit with all humility and respect for the institution was very unfortunate. So I don't think that is the way forward. And that would also reflect that the legislature or the executive does not have the confidence to undertake a particular initiative and therefore is throwing the ball back in the court of the court itself. That, I think, is a tried and tested tactic for some issues. It won't work for this. Okay. So I hope that they have the confidence, the civilizational confidence to have an open conversation, at least now. I don't know what Brahmastra it's going to be, because I'll tell you what. When, as Hindus, we see the kind of butchery that Hindus have put through in Manipur or in Bengal, I'm more interested in safeguarding my people, their livelihoods, their dignity and property, right? Than draw some kind of shallow satisfaction that, oh, UCC has been implemented. Ye checklist nahi hai. This is not a checklist. Article 370 ho gaya, Ram Janmabhoomi ho gaya, UCC ho gaya, chalo, our entire manifesto is done. That's not the way to go about it. Some things have to be delivered without a doubt. Article 370, yes, and so on. So I would be much more interested in seeing what kind of concrete steps the government is undertaking to check illegal migration, which is a greater threat than UCC. Okay, those are the issues that I'd want to wonder. Then what are they doing with respect to the rampant evangelical activity around the country? If they think that UCC will lead to some brownie points for 2024, at least certain segments of the population, of which I count myself to be a part, we will not be convinced. It doesn't help us in any way. There are other issues that we are interested in which are much more pressing from a Hindu perspective than the UCC. One, I don't consider myself an expert. Two, Proportionality is always to be tested on the anvils of the object sought to be achieved and the measure that is proposed and how the measure is implemented. That requires a document. We have nothing on record. We have nothing to discuss proportionality. Of course, it will be challenged without a doubt. Everything that this government does will be challenged, right? That is their niyati. However, whether the government's initiative will pass muster on constitutional anvils, that is a question that needs to be answered specifically, and without a specific document or provision, I certainly am not in a position to answer. We are obviously not a single society. We are a nation with multiple societies within. And if the two-nation theory has morphed into a different creature altogether after independence, then you're looking at a two-nation society at the very least, right? So I don't think we are a single society. And I don't know if that particular part of the society which is averse to reform and which believes that we live in Darul Harb and therefore this reform is not acceptable. If that is the mindset that we're dealing with, obviously it won't be accepted. The question is not whether Hindus will accept it. The thing is, Hindus have been used as human doormats for a very long time. But will the others accept it? I would say so. I don't know if the government, I'm sure there are strategic people within the government who understand this. But I am not saying that the government should not go down this path. I'm just saying if the government wants to, let it be clear and open about it, because a half-baked measure which lacks both conviction and preparation will backfire. I'm not asking the government to not go down this path. I'm saying the government needs to come very clean on this. And it's best sometimes to not stir a particular discussion until your preparation is ready.
Yeah.
Now, if the idea is to test waters, then I think the testing of the waters is done. You might as well focus on preparing.
Thank you, sir. Just put this. Then
It was short, 24 minutes. पूछ लिया सर